Hello everyone! Today I will be going through a brief history of video games, from the first game to the first gaming console, all the way to the modern 3D graphical masterpieces of today. But before we get into it, let's begin with some questions. Firstly, what is your favorite game? And if you like lots of games, just pick one, right? The first one that pops into your mind. Why do you like it so much? And if you could make changes to it, maybe make a sequel, what changes would you make to improve it? Next, think about which is your favorite gaming platform. Are you a PC, console, or mobile gamer? Do you prefer PS4, Xbox, and Nintendo Switch, or some other platform altogether? Why do you prefer games on that platform? Finally, do you have a favorite games company? Are you a Blizzard fanboy or fangirl? Maybe you really like EA or Ubisoft or Riot Games. Or maybe you don't have a specific favorite company. That's okay too. Now, pause the video, take a little time to think about these questions. Don't worry, I'll wait. Dum dee dum dee dum. Yeah. Done? Okay, let's continue. Now, let's take a trip back to ancient times, back before Steam and Google Play Store, back before YouTube gameplay streams, back before even Google, before the internet, even before computers. This is a brief history of video games. It's highly debatable which is the first ever video game. A lot depends on how you define a video game. The earliest electronic game was probably Bertie the Brain, which is a custom-built machine that played tic-tac-toe in 1950, followed by another custom-built machine called Nimrod in 1951 that played the game of Nim, the game where you take any number of matchsticks from a row, and the one who takes the last matchstick loses that game. But let's say that a video game must be one where there must be a video signal that is sent to a screen, possibly using a cathode ray tube, so we don't consider other electronic games without screens. In that case, the first game made solely for entertainment and not for research is probably Tennis for Two in 1958 that was implemented on an oscilloscope. But the first relatively widely available game, and therefore the one that's widely credited as the first ever video game, is MIT's Space War, which is a 1v1 dogfighting spaceship game. All this is, of course, ancient history, right? Nowadays, if you ask someone which is the first video game, they will be likely to guess Pong by Atari, as it was the first commercially successful game. It essentially started the video game industry, and it first appeared in video arcades where people would put coins into the machine to play. For quite a while, video arcades were really popular and all over the place, but game consoles started appearing around this time and would eventually overtake video arcades as the way to play games. Today, it is difficult to talk about video games without talking about gaming platforms like Nintendo versus PS4 versus Xbox, or mobile gaming versus console gaming versus PC gaming. So let's go through a history of gaming platforms. This is a partial timeline of video game consoles and the history. Y'all have to memorize this as you'll be tested later. Nah, just kidding. It's open book anyway. Now, as you can see, there have been many game consoles over the years. Some have completely disappeared, while some have evolved and survived. So let's talk about them. You may have heard of Atari, who were the undisputed king of video games in the 1970s. Their Pong game started off the video arcade industry, and in 1975, they created a home version of Pong. Their domination really started in 1977 when they launched the Atari 2600 home console system to enable people to play video games by hooking up their console to their television sets. Ultimately, the Atari 2600 sold over 30 million units, which is a huge number in this relatively new market. But the problem with such a huge success is that it attracted lots of competition, so plenty of other companies went into the market. In 1983, there was a huge arcade game crash due to market saturation, the rise of PCs, plus just a whole bunch of bad games that were mainly cash grabs, like this infamously horrible E.T. game based on the Steven Spielberg movie that was popular at that time. They also launched the Atari 5200 console in 1977, but it failed to take off as it was not backwards compatible with the 2600, and most of its games were just retreads of existing games. So ultimately, Atari as a corporation dissolved in 1984, although some of its subsidiaries still survive today. Next, let's talk about Nintendo, which started as a playing card company in 1889. Bet you didn't realize the company was that old. So they really started influencing the video game industry in 1977 when they hired a certain Shigeru Miyamoto. You may have heard of him, the guy who created Donkey Kong, Mario Brothers, and Legend of Zelda. That guy. So anyway, Nintendo released the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, in 1983 and was one of the pioneers of handheld game devices, with the Nintendo Game Boy in 1989. Nintendo has consistently been the forefront of technology, with a steady stream of top game devices like the SNES, the Nintendo 64, Game Boy Advance, GameCube, the Wii, and the 3DS. Of course, the latest console is the Nintendo Switch, and it's another successful game console. Many of the games have a Japanese or anime sensibility, from Mario and Zelda to Pokemon and Animal Crossing. A lot of the games have wide appeal. They handle non-controversial subject matter and are suitable for the whole family. This is one of the reasons why they are currently a key industry player in the video game market. At this point, let's talk about another console system that was big in the 1980s, but is no longer being produced, and that is Sega. Sega is a company that started in North America and eventually moved to Japan. In 1982, they entered the console market with the SG-1000 and the Master System in 1985 that actually outsold the NES in Europe. They really took off with the Sega Genesis in 1989, helped by the popularity of Sonic the Hedgehog in 1991. They continued to battle with the big boys with the handheld Sega Game Gear, but the next console, called the Sega Saturn, failed to keep up with Nintendo and the Sony PlayStation. The final console, right, the Dreamcast, it stopped production in 2001. Ultimately, Sega could not keep up with the other consoles that more high-profile games and better marketing and support. Today, they are a game developer and publisher, and they are still in the Guinness Book of World Records for being the world's most prolific game producer, with more than 500 games and 70 franchises. Next, let's talk about Sony, which started as an electronics company in 1946. Before going into the video game industry, Sony was well known for its audio equipment, especially the Sony Walkman portable music player. Its game division, called Sony Interactive Entertainment, was founded in 1993. They launched the first PlayStation a year later, featuring the DualShock controller. The PlayStation was the first computer entertainment platform to sell over 100 million units. Although they also produced the handheld consoles called the PlayStation Portable and PlayStation Vita, the main product currently is the PlayStation 4. Oh yeah, and the PlayStation 5 has been announced. Okay, Sony is known for its rigorous approval process for games that it accepts for its consoles. As a result, its platform is home to some of the most popular games and franchises of all time, including God of War, Final Fantasy, Metal Gear Solid, and The Last of Us. The last major home gaming console is the Xbox by Microsoft, which launched in 2000. It was graphically more powerful than its competitors with a Pentium processor and a built-in hard disk, but it was heavy and bulky as a result. It did okay, but was greatly outsold by the PlayStation 2. Nonetheless, Microsoft continued to improve the console with the Xbox 360 and the Xbox One, and also introduced the Xbox Live gaming delivery service and the Kinect motion capture device with varying success. Today, the Xbox has consolidated its market share in the game console market, and the new Xbox Series X is scheduled to be released in late 2020. With its PC roots, Xbox games are often ports of PC games and may have more complex player input schemes. And with its strong graphical capability, many of its popular games feature open worlds and advanced graphics such as Halo, Borderlands, Mass Effect, and Bioshock. We mustn't forget the massive market that is the mobile game market. Just look around when you're on a bus or MRT, or at least before the COVID-19 situation, when people are still taking buses and MRTs, and you will see people of all ages playing mobile games on their phones and tablets. The Apple iPhone and iPad, and to a lesser extent the iPod, are now regularly used for games. A lot of the games are modern re-implementations of older games which take advantage of mobile device features such as gesture detection and the accelerometer. For example, driving games that used to require a steering wheel for optimal experience can simply detect the tilt of the phone. And the touchscreen also provides new opportunities for creative game design, such as the drag and release control scheme of Angry Birds. And then, of course, there is the personal computer, PC Master Race. These machines are not built specifically for games, but it is now common to build gaming rigs, optimized with powerful graphics cards and plenty of RAM. It is easily accessible and available. After all, not all of you might have a PlayStation or a Switch, but I know you all have a laptop. The PC has both advantages and disadvantages over gaming consoles. The standard input device for PCs is the keyboard and mouse, which is great for complex games like Civilization or Half-Life, but is less immersive than video game controllers. With the great variety of hardware configurations, it is also harder to develop and optimize games for the PC compared to the specific hardware of consoles. While there are games with both PC and console versions, many games do not translate well between these platforms. Right, so let's pause for a bit and consider. If you have a preferred choice of console or gaming platform, what motivates your preference of one platform over the other? Is it the game selection? If so, is it because there is a specific type of game that you like that a particular platform supports really well? Or maybe it's the input method? Or is it the convenience? Are you perhaps a mobile gamer who likes nothing more than playing Pokemon Go while you take a stroll? And if you were developing a game, how will you decide which platform to use? We've come to the end of this lesson, fast, right? And you should now have a slightly better understanding of the history of video games, specifically as it relates to the development of all the popular modern gaming platforms. It is good to know your history and have an idea of how we came to be where we are today. And if you go into the games industry, you can help to write the next chapter.